It is Sunday afternoon. You have the whole day to yourself. No meetings, no obligations. You made a short list of things you actually wanted to do, things that matter to you. Maybe finish that project you started 3 months ago. Maybe write something. Maybe reach out to that person you have been meaning to reconnect with. And yet, here you are, hours later. You have watched 4 videos you didn't care about, and you've scrolled through things you won't remember by tomorrow. You ate something, stared at the wall a little, checked your phone again, and now the light outside is that particular shade of gold that only shows up when the day is almost gone. And somewhere in your chest, there is that quiet, familiar ache. Not anger, not sadness exactly. More like a low hum of disappointment that you have learned to live with. You tell yourself the same thing you always tell yourself. I'm just lazy. Maybe someone else told you first, and eventually you agreed. It felt like the most honest explanation. Simple, accountable even. But what if that word, lazy, is not actually describing you? What if it is hiding something else entirely? Here's the thing about the word lazy. We use it as though it is a personality trait, something fixed and intrinsic like eye color. But if you look closely at the people who call themselves lazy, you start to notice something strange. They are often not lazy at all. They will spend 3 hours researching something they are curious about. They can focus intensely when something actually matters to them. They help friends with remarkable energy. They lose themselves in the things they love. So the question becomes, why does the energy disappear when it is their own potential on the line? That distinction matters more than most people realize. Across centuries and cultures, the people we now call visionaries were almost universally described as difficult, inconsistent, or wasteful in their youth. Franz Kafka held a job he found meaningless and wrote in the small hours of the night, often for years, without showing anyone. Leonardo da Vinci left dozens of works unfinished, not because he lacked talent, but perhaps because finishing them made them real, made them available for judgment. Darwin waited more than 20 years to publish On the Origin of Species, long after his ideas were formed. We look at those stories from the outside and call it discipline or genius. But from the inside, it probably felt a lot like what you feel on a Sunday afternoon when you can't seem to start the thing you most want to do. Separating the stereotype from the reality. Let's be clear about something. There is real exhaustion in the world. There is burnout. There is depression. There is the kind of tiredness that comes from working 2 jobs, raising children, or carrying invisible grief. None of that is what we are talking about here, and it would be careless to collapse all of it into one idea. What we are talking about is something more specific. It is the person who has capacity, who has ideas, who has a genuine sense of what they could do, and who consistently stops just before the threshold of doing it. Not because life won't allow it, but because something internal keeps stepping in front of the door. The stereotype says that person is indulging themselves, that they lack willpower, that they need to try harder, want it more, be more disciplined. The reality is usually quieter and more complicated than that. Psychologists who study motivation have noticed for decades that avoidance behavior, the kind where someone steers away from things that actually matter to them, is almost never about not caring. It tends to be about caring too much, about the weight of what it would mean if they actually tried and came up short. Carol Dweck's work on what she called fixed mindset versus growth mindset gets talked about often in the context of learning, but there is a layer of her work that receives less attention. She found that people with a strong fixed mindset don't just fear failure, they fear the information that failure would deliver. Because if you genuinely believe your ability is fixed, that you are either talented or you are not, then trying hard and failing doesn't just mean you failed at a task, it means you failed at being the kind of person you hoped you were. The avoidance, then, is a form of self-protection, a rational response to an irrational but deeply held belief. The psychology of potential. There is a concept in psychology called self-handicapping, first described by Stephen Berglass and Edward Jones in 1978. It refers to the way people sometimes create obstacles for themselves before a meaningful performance, not because they want to fail, but because failure with an excuse is far safer than failure without one. If you procrastinate on the project, if you start it drunk or half distracted, if you never really give it your best, then whatever comes out of it doesn't represent you, it represents your circumstances. And that gap, that plausible deniability between you and your effort, is exactly the cushion some people need to survive the anxiety of being seen. What researchers found, and this is the part worth sitting with, is that self-handicapping was most common among people with the most fragile sense of self-worth, not among people who didn't care, among people for whom it mattered enormously. Think about that for a moment. The person who appears least invested is often the person most deeply invested. They have simply found a way to stay in the game without fully showing up, because fully showing up feels like an existential risk. This is not weakness, it is the mind doing what minds do, prioritizing protection over possibility, survival over expansion. The brain and the threat of becoming. Here is a metaphor that might make this feel more concrete. Imagine your sense of self as a structure you have spent years building. Maybe it is modest in some rooms and quite confident in others. You know where the walls are. You know which floors are solid. You have learned to live comfortably inside of it. Now imagine your potential, the full version of what you might become, is a larger structure, grander, more expansive, with rooms you have never been in. But moving into it requires tearing down some of the walls you know, and your brain, which above all else prioritizes a familiar baseline over an uncertain improvement, treats that demolition as danger. Neuroscience has a term for this, threat response. And the interesting thing is that it does not distinguish between physical threats and psychological ones. The same neural pathways that activate when you're physically afraid also activate when your identity feels at stake. The same chemistry. So when you sit down to work on the thing that means the most to you, and you feel an inexplicable need to check your phone, get a snack, reorganize your desk, that is not laziness. That is your nervous system responding to a perceived threat, the threat of being seen, the threat of discovering what you are actually capable of, the threat of becoming someone you have not yet learned to be. And here is the quietly strange truth at the center of all of this. Potential is not just motivating. For many people, potential is terrifying. A moment of self-reflection. I want to pause here and invite you to do something that does not require any action at all, just a moment of honest looking. Think about the things in your life that you have been circling without landing on, the project, the conversation, the decision, the work that feels like it belongs to a version of yourself you haven't quite become yet. When you think about those things, what is the feeling underneath the avoidance? Is it really boredom? Is it really a lack of time or energy? Or is it closer to this, a quiet background awareness that if you actually tried, really tried, the results would tell you something about yourself that you're not sure you're ready to know? There is no judgment in asking that, none at all, because the answer, whatever it is not a verdict on you. It's just information. And information, unlike stories we tell ourselves, can actually be worked with. It's also worth asking, has there ever been a time when you did show up fully for something, when you brought your whole effort and attention to a task that mattered? What was different then? What made it feel safe enough to try?
The answers to those questions are not random. They are pointing towards something specific about how you are built, how you learned to protect yourself, and what conditions allow you to expand past that protection. That is not a problem to solve. That is a map. The philosophical dimension. The philosopher Søren Kierkegaard wrote about something he called the dizziness of freedom, the anxiety that comes not from constraint, but from unlimited possibility. He noticed that when choices feel genuinely open, when there is no external authority telling you what you must be, the freedom itself becomes overwhelming. We freeze not despite our options, but because of them. This is not a modern phenomenon born of social media or productivity culture. It is ancient. It is human. The ancient Greeks had a word eudaimonia, often translated as happiness, but more precisely meaning something like living in full accordance with your deepest nature. The Stoics built entire philosophies around the gap between who a person is and who they are capable of being, and they treated that gap not as a failure, but as the very space where meaningful life happens. The Japanese concept of ikigai, roughly your reason for being, describes the overlap between what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can be sustained by. What's interesting about that framework is what it implies, that many people have a felt sense of their ikigai, but remain at the edge of it, close enough to feel its pull, far enough to avoid its demands. In other words, the distance between you and your potential is not a moral failure. It is a very human response to a very human kind of gravity.
Redefining the relationship with effort. There is a particular kind of person who reads or hears something like this and thinks, okay, but I still need to actually do the thing. And that is true. None of this is meant to replace action with explanation. Understanding why you avoid something does not automatically resolve the avoidance, but it changes the nature of the conversation you have with yourself about it. When you think of your avoidance as laziness, the internal dialogue becomes a form of prosecution. You are the defendant and the judge. You find yourself guilty, sentence yourself to shame, and then, because shame is one of the least motivating emotional states we know of, you change nothing. When you understand the avoidance as fear, something shifts. You can be curious instead of contemptuous. You can ask what the fear is actually protecting. You can negotiate with it rather than simply condemning it. Psychologist Tara Brach talks about what she calls the trance of unworthiness, a kind of background narrative that many people carry, quietly and often unconsciously, that says they are not quite enough, not talented enough, not ready enough, not deserving enough to step into the full version of their lives. The trance does not announce itself, it just quietly redirects you. It makes the smaller, safer choice feel like common sense. It makes the phone feel more comfortable than the blank page. It makes "I'll start tomorrow" feel like planning. Breaking that trance, she suggests, is not primarily about discipline. It is about presence, about learning to notice the moment of deflection before it becomes the whole day. Healthy engagement versus avoidance. This is also a good moment to be careful about something, because there is a real difference between necessary rest and avoidance dressed as rest, between genuine reflection and rumination that wears the costume of wisdom. Rest is restorative. It fills something. You feel lighter after it, more capable, more like yourself. Avoidance, even when it looks like rest, tends to leave a residue, that quiet ache, the Sunday afternoon feeling. Similarly, not every incomplete project is evidence of fear. Sometimes a thing genuinely was not right for you. Sometimes the timing was wrong. Sometimes what looked like potential was someone else's expectation wearing your face. Discernment is not the same as avoidance, and it takes real self-knowledge to tell them apart. The honest test is usually this:
Does thinking about the thing feel like relief when you step away from it, or does it follow you? Does the idea of letting it go feel like setting down a weight, or does it feel like losing something? Your body tends to know the difference, even when your mind is still negotiating. What I want to suggest is that recognizing this pattern in yourself, being willing to sit with the question instead of closing it with a convenient label, is itself a form of intelligence. Not a superior intelligence, not something to feel proud of in a way that separates you from other people, just a particular kind of honesty that many people never arrive at. There are people who move through their entire lives without ever pausing to ask why they keep stopping before the threshold of the things that matter most to them. They stay comfortable, or they stay busy, or they stay in the story that the problem is out there somewhere, the circumstances, the other people, the world's insufficient appreciation. And there is nothing wrong with them. People protect themselves in the ways they know how. But if you're still watching this, there is likely something in you that is ready for a different question. Not, why am I like this, as a condemnation, but what is this protecting, and what would happen if I didn't need that protection quite so much? That question does not have a quick answer. It is not the kind of thing that resolves in an afternoon. But the asking of it, the genuine, curious, compassionate asking, is already a different kind of motion than the one that keeps you circling. Closing, the simple truth. Here is what all of this comes down to in the simplest possible terms. Laziness, as a fixed trait, is largely a myth. What gets called laziness is almost always a story about energy going somewhere other than you expect it to go. And when that somewhere is protection, when the energy is quietly guarding you from the risk of fully becoming yourself, then the solution is never more discipline, it is more understanding. You are not lazy, you are careful. You, in your own way, are trying to keep something safe, a sense of yourself that has not yet found solid enough ground to bear the weight of your full effort. The work, then, is not to force the effort, it is to build that ground. Slowly, honestly, with more patience for yourself than you have probably been taught to have. Because the version of you that is afraid of what you might become deserves the same compassion as the version that is actively striving. They are not different people. They are the same person in different moments of the same life. And recognizing that, really recognizing it, not as a concept, but as a felt truth, is where the whole thing begins to shift. Not with a plan, not with a morning routine or a productivity system, just with a slightly clearer, slightly kinder look at the actual shape of what is happening inside you. That's where it starts, quietly, without fanfare. Right here. Outro. Soft call to action. If something in this video felt like it was describing you, I want you to know that the questions it raised are not meant to be answered in a single sitting. They are meant to stay with you, to resurface in the small moments when you notice yourself choosing the comfortable deflection over the meaningful attempt. In the next few videos, we're going to go deeper into some of what came up here. What it actually looks like when fear of success operates differently from fear of failure. Why some people consistently arrive at the edge of their potential and stop, and what shifts when they finally don't. And the quieter conversation about identity, and why becoming who you are capable of being sometimes feels like losing who you know yourself to be. If those questions feel relevant to you, staying close to this channel is probably worth your time. For now, though, wherever you are, I hope this gave you something true to sit with. That is enough for today.